Alright, now let's create our buttons or controls. So what we're going to do, we're going to use a bootstrap row. So we will place the controls inside a row, and out of the 12 columns of the row, we're going to use 2 columns for the first button and 2 columns for the second button. Okay? And by the way, we're going to have a few buttons inside each column, okay? As some buttons are going to be appearing and some other buttons are going to be disappearing depending on which scenario we are in. Okay? So for the first column, we're going to have 3 buttons: start, stop, and resume. And for the second bit, we're going to have 2 buttons: the reset and the lap button. Okay? So let's go ahead and create our div. So now we are looking at controls. Okay, and we're going to create a div or row and give it an ID, controls container. Okay, and a class of row. So inside the div, we're going to have a few divs that we're going to style using the column XS classes. Okay, so the first one is going to be a div of class column XS2. So I'm using XS because I want this configuration in extra small screens and beyond that. Okay, so I'm going to need another class for the offset because we are skipping 4 columns, and that class is going to be column XS offsets. Okay, and we're looking at 4 columns to skip. Okay, so inside this div, we are going to create our 3 buttons. So each button is going to be a div. So the first one, we're going to give it an ID, start button. Okay, so that's going to be the start button. And let's write some text inside. Starts. Also, we're going to give it a class so that we can style all the buttons at the end. We're going to call this class control. So let's move to the second button. It's going to be the resume or the stop button. Okay. The third one is going to be the resume button. All right. Now let's move to the second div. So we're going to use only the column XS2 class for this div. And the buttons inside it are going to be the lap and reset buttons. So the first one is lap button. And the second one is going to be reset. And we have only 2 buttons in there. Okay. Now we are ready to style our controls. So first of all, let's make the container have some margin bottom so that when we have the lap box, later we have this gap. Okay. So we're going to be moving here to the buttons or controls, and we're going to start by accessing the controls container. And we're going to give it some margin bottom. And we're going to go for 100 pixels. Then we're going to go to the buttons. So we gave them a class control. Okay. So let's style our buttons. So we're going to give them a white color for the text. So we're going to use the color property, and set that to white. And also we are going to okay, let's just refresh this. Okay, so we are going to style the background color. So the color I'm using is D7A04E. Okay, and we're going to turn the divs into circles by setting the border radius to something big like 100%. Okay. Before we see a circle, we need to specify the width and height of the divs. Okay, so let's do that before the border radius. So let's go for a height of 10 units of VWs, and for the width, let's go for the same VW, 10 VWs. So now we see circles, okay, but the text is outside. So first we will need to center the text using the text align property, and we set it to center. Okay, also we are going to place the text in the middle of the circle rather than at the top. So to do this, we're going to add some padding top. So we'll set the padding property to 2 values. So we'll use the first value for the top and bottom sides. So I'm going to use a percentage, which refers to the containing element. Okay, and for the left and right sides, we're going to keep it as 0. Okay, let's have a look at the final website. Okay, let's increase the font size as well to 2.5 VWs. Okay, and finally, when we hover on the buttons, we want to change the cursor to a pointer. So we set the cursor property to pointer. Okay, and it looks fine. Now, when the buttons are active, we want to change the background color to a white color, and the text is going to become orange, just like that. Okay, so we'll use the same background color we used for the buttons for text when it's active. So to access the buttons when they are active, we're just going to use the control class and then : active. Okay, so we're changing the background color to a white color. And also we are changing the text color to this same color. Okay, for now we're going to leave all the buttons there, and we're going to hide the extra buttons using jQuery code later on. So now let's move to the other bit, which is the labs box. Okay, so we're going to create a div for these labs, and we're going to give it a max height. Okay, and also we're going to set the overflow Y property. Okay, so that we can scroll vertically like this. So let's create this element. Okay, just one thing. We want all the elements to be inside the container fluid. box. Okay, so we are looking at closing the div there. Okay. All right, now let's move to the labs div. So let's create a div and give it an ID, labs. Okay, and let's style it using its ID. So as we said, we're going to give it a maximum height, and let's set that to 270 pixels, and let's set the overflow Y property to scroll. Okay. In the next video, we are going to go through the logic of the app.